All right, here we go with Chapter 7, The French Defense from our 1E4 course. How are you doing, Jesse?
I'm doing well, Matt. How you doing?
Just as good as our blooper recording. So we start out with E4, E6, French Defense, third most popular system against 1E4. And we're going to try to play in a similar style to our C3 Sicilian lines. We're recommending D4. After D5, we recommend E5. Notice these pawns pointing towards the black king side. That gives us potential long-term attack over there. And then after C5, we're recommending C3. So this is going to be kind of similar to some of the C3 Sicilian lines. Um, so at this point, we're already at a branch. What lines are we going to look at here?
Yep, so we're going to look at three moves from this position: knight c6, queen b6, and c takes d4. So let's start with knight c6. I think this is probably looks like the slightly most common move in this position. After knight c3, we are going to play knight f3. Sorry, knight c6, not knight c3, knight c6, knight f3, just to reinforce the d pawn. And we're at another branching point here. And a lot of these lines are going to likely transpose to each other, so it will avoid transpositions in these side lines. So let's look at the immediate queen b6, putting pressure on the d pawn. We have it properly defended at this point. So how are we going to go about this position from here, Matt?
So I went back and forth on this one a little bit because in my chess career, I played the advanced for a while, and then I also played the Tarrasch variation for quite a while. And I really wanted to stick with the advanced for this course. So the recommendation that I ended up picking was 6A3. And what I like about this move is it's tricky and it kind of will put the game hopefully in our court. And our plan is to play B4 next, allowing the C1 bishop to possibly go to B2 to help defend in the center. So it's kind of like an offbeat line slightly. Um, but there's a lot of like common ideas that we can use so that we don't have to memorize a ton of theory. And one cool thing with this line that I really like, the most popular move at the club level is actually a mistake. I do like to look for those types of moves in our courses where we can possibly encourage the opponent to make a mistake or the mistakes are pretty common. C takes D4 is the most popular move here. And this makes it very easy for us to get developed while keeping the space advantage. So how are we going to counter this move?
Yeah, well, taking with the knight doesn't work super well because it can take our e-pawn for free. So let's just keep our pawn structure intact and take with the c-pawn. And what I like about this move too is it frees up the c3 square for our knight. So it kind of helps our development as well as our pawn structure. So that kind of maybe highlights why it's an issue there for white. Not losing or anything, but there's much more critical ways to play. So let's look at knight ge7 here. And here, black is probably going for a maneuver like this where they can put extra pressure on our d pawn. So we want to be able to counter that in kind of a tricky way. So we'll play knight c3 here. And we're going to see in their next few moves what we're going to do if they try to attack our d pawn.
Yeah, this is the key idea to know in these lines. After knight to f5, with a triple attack on the d-pawn, it looks like at first glance there's no easy way to defend it, because a move like bishop to e3 would leave the b2 pawn undefended. The key idea here to remember is we have knight to a4, and if black plays queen to a5, checking us, our queen does defend the knight, so we can actually just play b4 in that line. And queen to a5 does not help black at all. So this is the cool way that we have to defend d4 with tactics by kicking the queen. So the most common move here is queen back to c7. And now our recommendation is pawn to g4. I love these g pawn pushes. JD was talking about these earlier with me today. What I like about this is we're gaining extra space on the king side, and it's not very easy for black to attack us on that flank. So at this point, black is going to tend to sacrifice on d4 or retreat the knight to e7. You're most likely to see one of those two. Um, and I think the engine might have actually said the sacrifice is best. Yeah, I just peeked at it, or at least it's tied for equal. But in both cases, we have a 1 point advantage. So let's start with knight f to e7.
Yeah, yep. So the other line would be taking here, queen takes, and we get a piece for two pawns. But this is the much more natural looking move, especially after we just crazily threw our G pawn down the board. So what we're going to do here is play bishop e3, just develop a piece. And a way to remember this one is we really want our rook on the c file, pinning this queen. So let's quick get our bishop out of the way. And e3 is the most nice looking square, just adding a little extra protection to our weakest pawn. So bishop e3. Um, Again, looking to go rook c1 very quickly. And after knight g6, we have a pretty nice move here, and that is h4. Just throwing our h4 pawn down the board. I like this move a lot. So this is where the line ends. So what's the plan from here, Matt?
So we're looking at a 2.3 on Stockfish advantage, which is almost a full piece already. And that's due to the space, first of all. We have activity and we also have the initiative. So those three factors are adding up to the 2.3 edge. And to answer your question, our plan is bishop to d3, rook to c1. We would like to play h5 as well, just putting that knight in more danger. And if black plays a move like h5 themselves, we can actually take this pawn. And if rook takes h5, now this is getting a little bit shaky for black on the light squares, and it actually makes it even a bit easier for us to attack on the king side. So nice king side attack in this first line. This is going to be the most popular moves at the club level for black. And we ended you with a 2.3 stockfish edge. So we should be pretty
You're
happy if they play that c takes d mistake on move 6.
yeah, you're welcome.
You're welcome. Yes. All right, so let's go back to move 6 for black. We'll give them a better option. Let's look at bishop to d7. What are we going to do against this?
Yep, so against bishop d7, they're not really doing anything to prevent us to prevent our b4 plan. So we can go for it now. And a thing to remember here is they're almost always going to take the d pawn. If they take the other way, we just get a really good position anyway. So we're only going to cover c takes d4 lines because this just leads to a really good position as well.
Wait, can I add something? If they
No,
take on b4, we actually would like to take with the a pawn.
oh, sorry.
That's okay. So c takes b will transpose to c takes d, but we can actually take with the a pawn, and this is a better version for us because now we have an extra center pawn, and we have our rook lined up down the a file. So black should take on d4, and they may think that they're the same because it honestly looks like we're just going to take back with c. If they take the b pawn, take back with a, and you can get a slight advantage compared to this version. Okay, so c takes d, knight g to e7, and now we get knight to c3 again. So whenever we see that c pawn gone, it makes it a lot easier for us to develop our knight. And black wants to play, just like we saw in the previous line, knight to f5. Now what, Jesse?
Yeah, well, we kind of have the same idea. So knight a4, not allowing them to take here without us taking their queen. So a nice kind of counter attack type of move. Queen c7, and here they're attacking our pawn a couple times. So we want to over defend it. Bishop b2, setting another defender, and again looking for this really quick rook c1 move. So anything else to say about bishop b2 here?
I would like to throw some stats out. We're looking at a 68% white is winning at the club database to 28% for black. And I put stats in a couple points in this chapter. It seems like it's always in the 60% white winning, 20% black winning range. So that's looking pretty good. And we would like to get this bishop to d3 and castle king side. That's kind of the plan in the next few moves. Let's look at bishop to e7. If black plays b5, which is a tempting move there, we can play knight to c5, which is a really good outpost for the knight. Bishop e7, get our rook on the open file. A6 is the most popular move. And at this point, you could play h4 and play that aggressively. I'm recommending that first we get castled and then we look to expand in this variation. So let's start with bishop to d3.
Yep. So after bishop d3, black can castle. Now we can castle. So mission accomplished. Getting castled. We have same side castling, and white can, or sorry, black can go b5. And just like Matt said before, after b5, this seems like a bit of a mistake because we can plant our knight right in on c5. And if they do take us, we're going to get a nice passed, or we could go for a nice pass pawn. But actually, what we're going to do instead is rook takes and really pressure this queen, pin the knight, and we're working with an open file here, and black has some open pawns to deal with.
So what I
Yeah, I was gonna say, what's the plan for going from here?
what I like about this is we're going to use that rook on c5 to just try to cement the queen side, and the center is already well locked up. And then we're going to push on the king side to create our attack. And it looks sneaky here because we're already castled king side, so black's probably thinking like, oh, there's no pawn storm coming, or the thought's not even crossing their mind for king side attack. But look at this plan: g4, h4, knight g5. This bishop can drop back to b1, and the queen can come up to d3, hitting h7. So we can use all of these rearranging moves to just get everything pointing at the black king side while we have the queen side locked down. Like if black tries to play a5, b5 is double attacked. And how long is it going to take black to get that rook out of there on the c5 square? Even if they get a rook to c8, offer the trade, we could always take back with the pawn. So really, we have a lot of time here to get this kingside attack developed. Guess what the stockfish eval is in this position?
Um, 1.
2.5. It's in the
I
notes.
knew
I know you saw it.
that. I wanted to make it a little more dramatic, like, oh, it doesn't look like more than 1.
Yeah, I like it.
2.5.
So that's two lines now where we're looking at around a 2.5 pawn advantage for white. All right, so let's now go to move 6, c4. So we previously looked at c takes d, and we looked at bishop d7. Now let's see what happens if black locks up the queen side with c4. This is the most popular move at the master level. I believe it's the strongest move, and what it's doing is it's trying to take advantage of our a3 move. Because when you see this black pawn chain on the light squares, the natural way to chip away at it is to play b3, but b3 is not defended by the a pawn. So it's a nice way to positionally try to counter our a3 move.
Yeah, so we can try to manufacture playing b3 here. So let's start with knight bd2. And here we are threatening to play b3, and we can kind of trade off now that we have two defenders here. Black can prevent that plan with knight a5, so not allowing this b3 move right away. But we can continue to reinforce the pawn break threat with rook b1. So this is a really handy move, just like really saying, no, 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 we're, we're playing b3.
Yeah, or b4 even. They're both coming. Um,
Mhm.
one thing I forgot to mention is in this line, when black plays c4, you should be thinking already that black most likely wants to queenside castle. Almost always their king is going to go that direction. Okay, so after rook b1, most common move, bishop to d7. And again, they're actually kind of preparing for us to play b3 because they can go for this bishop a4 pin after the trade, after the initial trade. So we're not quite ready to play it. We're going to recommend bishop to e2. And our plan next is to actually play h4, maybe h5, and we can tuck our king over on g2. As strange as this looks, we're in a very closed position, and a lot of this is about space, right? So think of like when Alpha Zero came onto the scene and it did a really good job playing for long-term space advantages. That's exactly how we're going to play this position. We're actually expanding on the king side with the locked up center so that we can keep control of the king side while we're getting ready to break on the queen side. So that's kind of the idea here. And the more games you play in this line, the better a feel you'll get for these positions.
Yeah, so we continue a few more moves, it looks like. So knight e7, and like Matt said, h4. So let's just go for it. Expand with h4. Black castle's long, and here we're going to do a slight little knight maneuver. So knight f1. What's the idea behind knight f1? Because when I'm training this, I can never remember knight f1.
Yeah, knight f1 is a strange looking move. If we go back to this position and look at the threats for black, there's no big immediate threats. But what we want to do with knight f1 is we want to reroute the knight eventually. But we need to get the bishop out first. So like bishop f4, and then maybe that f1 knight can go back to d2 or it could go to e3, depending on what black does. But yeah, I agree with you. It's a very counterintuitive move, and I think the way to remember it is we want to get that bishop out to f4, and then the knight can move again.
Okay, makes sense. So after knight f1, yeah, black was probably going to slide their king over. And let's just show a few more moves for how we want to play this. So h5, really just grabbing space, knight c8, and h6. So putting our pawn all the way down the board. And after g takes, we're just going to win the pawn back, right?
Not yet. We can delay it. That pawn will always be there for us to capture. I like the setup. Bishop f4. And Stockfish has given us a 1.5 advantage. I think it's due to the space and the board control again. And what we would like to do here is play queen to d2, knight to g3, because the g3 knight can come to h5 now. So we talked about possibly rerouting the knight to d2, but in this position we see these weak pawns for black. We can reroute that knight all the way over to h5. And then we can play moves like king to f1, bishop to d1, and slowly improve our position. So we're not really in a hurry here. The d1 bishop supports the b pawn break. King to f1 actually plans on tucking the king onto a safe square, g2, keeping the rooks more connected along the first rank. So it's a very slow maneuvering game. And if these positions don't feel intuitive, this is one where you want to just go play around with the engine, right? Try out moves that look good for you from the black side and just see how Stockfish plays back. And you can kind of start to get a feel for the plans. So should we now go to knight g to e7 on move 6? This is a
Yeah.
small mistake. I love showing the mistakes. All right, so what are we going to do here?
Yep. So you'll notice that with this knight move, black has cut off their bishop from the defense. So we can go for a kind of a forcing line here. So d takes c5. And it's always fun to take this pawn when they have to take back with the queen. So a lot of times you don't want to take this pawn because it just leaves this e pawn kind of dangling. But we have tactical reasons to do so here. So after we take the pawn, queen takes, we have this immediate b4 move again. And after the queen moves away somewhere, queen b6 or something, we have the immediate c4, another pawn break, getting our bishop into the game. Um, how'd you find this line? It's a good one.
Well, what I like about it is black is developing slowly. So I found this line because we look at the club level database. We're
Mhm.
not looking at grandmaster games, right? So grandmasters aren't as likely to play this move, knight g to e7 on move 6. So what we're doing here is we see the slow development by black. We're breaking the center open. Most players are going to capture this pawn, which is also a small mistake. Now we can play knight b to d2. This is threatening. Knight takes c4, followed by planting the knight on d6 check. We have 30 games in the club database. White won 93% of them. How many is that? 93% of 30.
That's like most.
Yes. 28 probably. So now black will play c3 most likely because they don't want to just give us that pawn so easily. But here we can actually ignore getting the pawn immediately and still go for knight c4 because this attack is going to be so strong. And look at this square d6. Queen's being attacked. Queen c7. Now we play knight d6 check.
Mhm.
The king has to walk on the d file where our queen is. Now we play knight to b5 check. The queen dies, and we are up 9 points according to Stockfish. Largest advantage yet this chapter.
Love it. That's a fun line.
Have you encountered this one in a game yet?
I have not, unfortunately. I have played maybe like 10 games in the French defense,
Okay.
but no queen traps, unfortunately.
Yeah, I kind of get the French in spurts. Like I can go a really long series of games and not see a single French defense, and then all of a sudden it'll happen in like 3 games. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Now let's go back to move 5. We looked at queen to b6. Let's look at bishop to d7 next.
And yeah, after bishop d7, it's kind of a strange move because they're not looking to pressure this d pawn. Not really a good square for the bishop, not doing anything with the queen. So we're going to stick with our a3 to be consistent with our other repertoire, or other lines in this repertoire, I should say. And we're kind of expecting queen b6 soon anyway. So we'll start with a6. We have a branching point here between f6 and knight ge7. Let's look at f6. So this is a bit of a mistake, isn't it? Or maybe not a mistake, but just a tricky move.
Yeah, I would say it's kind of a tricky move. What are we going to do to combat this?
Yep. So after the f6 move, it's tempting to take or something like that, but really we can just apply some pressure to this knight. So if you can see if they take us, we can actually insert this capture of the knight, and there's a lot of fun tactics at play here. Let's take a look at what happens.
So the most common move by 2 to 1 is knight takes e5. Players are going to like to use this tactic, right? This is a very common tactic that we all learn at some point in our chess careers. When you see that pin blocked by the bishop, knight takes e5. In this case, though, we have a strong counter coming with queen to h5 check because that f pawn moved. So let's see how this will happen. Knight takes e5, takes e, and if they play bishop takes b5 here, that's actually a blunder due to queen h5 check with our knight guarding these two squares. So keep that in mind. That's a blunder. After f takes, we're still going to play queen h5 check. And now let's follow the most popular move, pawn to g6.
Yep. And after pawn g6, we still don't have to relieve this tension. We can actually take this pawn back. And notice we're on the rook now. So a nice queen maneuver. Look at these pawns. This is not a pretty situation here. Um, so queen takes e5. Let's look at queen f6. So here we're threatening for a very good advantage, but we need to play pretty precisely. So we can start by capturing the bishop. The king will capture back, of course. And instead of taking the queen or moving the queen, we have a very nice move, bishop f4. And if you notice, if the queen takes us, we can take back with the bishop, and this rook in the corner is a goner. And so I have actually had this line in a game, and I'm pretty sure they didn't take, and I got to do some like cool checkmate. I'm
That,
trying to find it in the database, but I'm not seeing it.
that's really cool that you had the line. And I think
Yeah.
it's common enough, that we see these types of lines because we're only 12 moves deep. And a lot of the moves were pretty natural for black. And this is a 2.3 stockfish advantage due to this threat, queen c7 check, and there's no queen trade for black. I think the advantage is due to our king's safety and the potential to attack here. And our plan is to play knight to d2. We'd like to castle kingside, and then maybe play c4 and open up the center with the king sitting on d7. So really nice position, 2.3 stockfish advantage. Now let's go back to move 6 and look at knight g to e7 first instead of pawn to f6.
Yeah, so after knight ge7, okay, so the move before this was f6. So white is probably, or sorry, black is probably going to go for knight to f5 and pressure our d pawn. So we can play bishop d3 since we have a move to do this. And after takes queen b6. So now they're putting some more pressure on our d pawn. How are we able to defend this pawn tactically here?
We
Maybe not
have
so tactically.
we have bishop to c2. So that's why bishop to d3 was so important when we played it, because the timing works great, where we can just tuck that bishop back. Bishop sits very nicely on c2. There's no knight to b4 kicking it. And this bishop also guards the f5 square. So the most common move for black, and the only way to really try to keep the pressure on us, is to play knight f5 here. And now we're recommending take that knight off. I know we're giving up the bishop pair and we're also giving up our good bishop, but this imbalance with the isolated d pawn for black and the potentially weak f pawn, and the fact that this bishop is on the same color as all of these pawns actually gives us a lot to play for. I really like this position for white, and we can continue very simply here with knight c3, already gaining a tempo on the d5 pawn.
Yep, and the theme you'll see in the next few lines is getting this bishop out with good timing. So hopefully this move is going to be a little more familiar to you as the chapter goes on. So after knight c3, bishop b6, just defending the pawn. And here we're going to just throw the h pawn. So I love when we get to play h4. It's just like such a fun move. I don't get to play it that much in my current repertoire, so I'm always happy to see h4.
Yeah, and
And whenever we have this closed up structure like this, the pawn flank moves are much more effective and less weakening.
And a lot of times here, black wants to play G5, surprisingly enough.
Hmm.
Like they might play H6, G5. So H4 just prevents that before it even becomes an idea. And it gives us firm control on this dark square when you see all of the black pawns on light squares. It's a nice way to positionally play against this. So let's look at pawn to H6 for black, most common move. Here we recommend a castle. And after bishop to E7, a recommendation is knight to E2. Now, at this point, the stockfish eval is actually very close to even. So we haven't seen any mistakes by black. And that's why we needed to be very precise with that bishop to D3, bishop back to C2 maneuver. But I really like the imbalances in this position, and I think it gives us great chances to play for a win. What's our plan here going forward?
Yeah, so we're looking to play moves like H5, Rook B1, reinforce the pawn, Knight F4, kind of the idea behind retreating, and maybe B3 or even B4, and just connect the rooks, get our pieces developed. So nothing mind-boggling.
Yeah, and this is one where you just play it positionally, right? There's no immediate tactics, and hopefully it gets a little uncomfortable for black when their bishop on e6 is worth about the value of a pawn right now. So we can try to use that to our advantage.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the best line for black we've seen so far. Let's go to move 5. Now we will look at knight g to e7. So we previously looked at, in this position, queen to b6. We looked at bishop to d7. And now we're looking at the third option, knight g to e7. Um, this leaves the c pawn undefended, though, temporarily. And we could take it, but we have an improvement even on that. It's a clever idea. What are we recommending here?
Yeah, so black is going to want to go bishop f5 and triple attack this d pawn. Bringing the bishop out is okay because if they play, we can take, but it's not really what we want to do since we are giving up our good bishop. So instead, we can reinforce this d pawn with our other knight. And by the way we do that is knight a3, looking to come to c2. So knight a3 after knight f5 as expected, knight c2, and now we're defending this pawn well and kind of holding our structure together.
And I think, black players will get uncomfortable when they see us do these little maneuvers like knight a3, knight c2, bishop d3, bishop c2. Because what happens is they realize, oh, they got the d4 square covered. Now what? Right? Like now maybe they need to play for the C file, but they're behind in development, behind in space. I really like this type of maneuver. C takes D is the most popular way to reply. We have C takes D back, and after queen to B6, we can again use some tactics to play bishop to D3. And we aren't losing this D pawn because in the very end, after all the trades, there's bishop to B5 check, and black would lose their queen. So they aren't able to win the pawn.
Yep, so nice tactical developing move. Maybe you'll get a few wins like that, hopefully. Let's look at bishop b4 check. So we don't want to just take this, do we?
No.
No.
Let's move the king.
King f1. Let's play king f1. And now the question is, can they? I guess that's not this line. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So most popular move here is for black to king to castle. Do we need to address the king on f1? I
Maybe
guess
slight
it's.
maybe slightly. So we are up we have a 1 point stockfish advantage. Um, the king is safe on f1, and what we would like to do is actually expand our pawns on the king side. So we want to play g4 again, and our king could hide on g2, and the h pawn could push. This is a very common idea in the chapter. And one thing I want to mention, like a lot of these lines, if you've never played them before, are very unintuitive, I think, from the white side because the position is so closed and we're used to just like develop naturally, just put pieces only to the middle, only castle with the king. Um, but we are playing the French advance variation and we want to really push for advantages out of the French advance and also have it mesh well with our Sicilian chapters. That's why we're kind of going for these interesting lines in the French advance where we can really push black and play for the advantage in lines that they also tend to make mistakes. Let's go a couple moves deeper here. After castle for black, we have pawn to g4. That knight will most likely retreat. Now look at this, Jesse. a3, and the bishop is trapped.
Bishop has nowhere to go, so that makes that g4 move so much more attractive because the knight can't go back. So they're gonna have to come up with something clever. Because after a3, this bishop can't go anywhere. All these squares are taken, and that's the magic of having all these pawns on dark squares.
Yeah, and let me show it one more time. So when we played king to f1, we actually set that trap, right? We left this
Hmm.
bishop hanging out here knowing that if black castles, there's a quick g4. And at this point, even a move like knight to h6 is not so good for black because after takes, queen c1, we have the rook coming to g1. We have a lot of pieces ready to attack on the king side, and all of black's pieces are kind of tied up over here on the queen side. So that's kind of the advantage of having that closed center with the pawns pointing to the black king. We're ready for that attack over on the king side when the black king lands there.
Yeah, this looks like a really nice attacking position, and that g file is going to open up at some point.
Yeah, I really like this line. Okay, so now let's go all the way back to move 4. We looked at knight to c6. That was 7 lines. We figure about two-thirds of the time you'll probably see knight to c6 here. We're going to look at queen to b6 for 2 lines, and then we will look at c takes d for the final line of the chapter. So let's start with queen to b6. What are we going to do here?
All right, yeah, so anytime you see queen b6, I think we're always recommending a3. So nice way to keep that in mind. We're looking for b4 in a lot of these lines. Um, we'll look at a5 next, but first let's start with bishop d7. So here we could go b4. What's the reason for not recommending b4 in this position, Matt?
I think b4 is a perfectly fine move. I recommended knight to f3 just because there's a ton of transpositions in this position. Black is most likely to play knight to c6, either on their next move or the last move. So what knight to f3 does is it kind of just leans us back towards transposing into our main lines because it's there's no extra advantage in playing b4 versus knight f3. They're pretty much similar, but I wanted to kind of keep it simpler by playing with transpositions in mind.
Yep. So instead of learning a whole new other repertoire, just hopefully play knight c6, and we're back on our mainline stuff. So makes sense. Maybe we'll still get to play b4 sometime. So one thing that Black is doing here is actually a very strong strategic idea that we're going to allow. So if you can see, this is by far our best bishop, and this is Black's best bishop. So it makes a lot of sense to play bishop b5 and trade off these bishops. So that is a good idea. And that said, it's not that great for Black. We still have a lot going for us in the position, namely space. So we're going to take this bishop. Queen will take, and now we get to play our favorite move, b4.
And if they play c takes b, we're taking with the a pawn again. So similar to the other line we looked at, that's the small mistake. Most likely they will play c takes d4. We take back with the c pawn. Now you might be wondering, why did we allow black to trade off their bad bishop for our good bishop? The reason why is because we secure the space advantage, and black took a lot of time to do that, right? So you notice that bishop moved twice, 1, 2, and then their queen moved for a third move. That was 3 moves to get the one bishop developed. We moved our bishop in 1 move, and the extra moves were spent gaining space, and that's what this chapter is all about, right? We're trying to control space and go for a positional advantage. And if you check it with the engine, I think we're looking at still a half a pawn advantage for white. So the engine does appreciate good versus bad bishops, but it's also weighing all the other factors, and we are still in better shape here after the bishop trade. So let's keep going down this line and see what could happen. Knight to c6, knight to c3, developing with a nice tempo on the queen. And black cannot prevent our castling for much longer. So we see that queen hitting f1. If they play queen to c4, which I think is the most logical move, trying to keep that prevention of castling, what are we going to do here?
Yep. So here we have a really nice pawn sacrifice. This D pawn is it's a nice pawn, but it's time to say goodbye to the D pawn. Bishop D2, and if they take here with the knight, yes, they're getting a free pawn, but look what that does to their king. We have knight or queen check coming. Uh, Assuming we take back, knight B5 here is really strong, threatening this fork, and so we're giving up a pawn if black is brave enough to take it. But they're going to be in some trouble here. So knight takes, queen takes, and before we get too crazy, let's just castle. And we have a huge attack here. And white does not, or sorry, black does not want to castle right into this pin or X-ray rather. So what we want to play here is queen a4 check, knight b5, rook c1, either rook, and this just looks like a dream position. Wide open position. Look at these sad pieces on the back rank for black. Um, Risky pawn to grab, to say the least.
Yeah. I mean, black was already down in development, and then they go for that pawn with the king stuck in the middle. This is a 3.4 stockfish advantage, so it was definitely a mistake for black to go down this line. They got a little bit too greedy. Let's go back to move 5 now, and we will look at a5. So we just looked at bishop to d7. Now we're going to a5. Prophylactic move trying to prevent our b4 push.
Yep, it's always sad when they prevent b4, but we'll deal. We'll deal. So knight f3, knight c6, and again, we're going to defend this d pawn with a little bit of tactics. So again, if they just mass take here, take, we have the b4 check at the end, and we're going to pick up the queen. So another example of developing with tactical awareness. Bishop d7, and this is actually a key move because if you imagine that last line with all the captures, we had the check in the end, but now this bishop blocks the check. So here, in order to hang on to the d pawn, we need to drop our bishop back so our queen can play a role in defending as well.
Yeah, so we get that nice maneuver again. And we're also keeping in mind if the black knight comes out to f5, we do have the option again to trade off that c2 bishop for the knight. So knight g to e7, the main move for black. That blocks the f8 bishop. So we're going to use this idea again. D takes c. And like Jesse mentioned before, this forces the queen to recapture. And that queen can become a target on the very next move with bishop to e3. And at this point, we're using our pieces to gain some time on the black queen. What is black going to do here?
Well, black has a grand total of one queen move, and that's right here. So we can bank on them playing that. Our b pawn is hanging, so we do need to address that. So let's play b3, and this is a very sneaky move. So let's say black just does something like fianchetto their bishop, or maybe move a knight. This queen has 0 squares, so they need to find a some way to get this bishop out of the way, or bishop d3 is coming and winning a full queen.
What a sneaky queen trap. I love that. I mean, that queen's
Yeah.
moving around like a Scandinavian queen without an escape route. It's really bad for black. So let's give black the most common move, knight to a7. This is a mistake. Our reply is knight to d4. Now you can see our minor pieces really starting to take control of this position. And again, if you look at potential, or I should say safe queen squares, these two run into the discovered attack on with from the bishop on e3. So queen to a6 is the only safe looking move. Now we play bishop to d3, hitting the queen again. And after b5, we can castle. So this is a 2.1 eval advantage. We have extra space, extra development, definitely superior minor pieces if you look at these guys in the center. What's our plan in this position?
Yeah, just look at the quality of pieces. Like, who develops that way on purpose? We got black like bending over backwards just to like hold their pieces together.
French defense
Um,
players, that's the answer. You
yeah,
know, they don't like developing.
yeah, got them. All right, so our plan here. So we want to play f4. Sorry, f4. Cannot draw arrows tonight. f4, knight d2, and maybe move like b4 or c4 to open up the queen side. Black really needs to do some work to get castled. It'll be fun to see how they plan on accomplishing that.
or not accomplishing it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I like that line a lot too. Now let's go to move 4 and look at the last option. C takes D4. Based on the statistics, I know you guys care. 7% of the time, I'm guessing this will be played. Almost the 10% for one line. So at this point, we're recommending C takes D4 back. After knight to C6, we have knight to F3. And here, let's follow the main line. Knight E7, trying to come out to F5. Now we get to use this move that I really like in the French defense, knight to A3, taking advantage of the fact that black does not have a quick bishop takes A3, and our knight wants to head to C2 to help defend our pawn.
Yep. So black will very likely continue putting pressure on our d pawn, but we're just in time to defend that pawn with our other knight. So that's got to annoy black when we're just like we know exactly what they're going for. We just calmly develop our pieces, take away their play. So after queen b6, again we can develop our bishop with this timing. Again, the same check at the end of the line. Bishop d7, and now that check is gone. However, we can set a little trap here and see how what's going to happen to black if they try to win this pawn.
I love these traps, and it's the most common move for black again. So knight takes D4. We're going to take. After black recaptures, bishop to E3, in it to win it. Black is completely busted. So let's show bishop to C5, trying to hold on to the knight. We can now
Yep, and
play. Go ahead.
I was going to say it looks like it's working until you see b4, and sadly, black is just going to lose a piece here. So if they try to capture here, we can take back here with the bishop, and now we're on the bishop. Now we're on the queen and the knight, and we're winning a piece.
What's the eval?
Oh, +5? I don't know.
Yeah, +7.
+7, nice.
And we do have in the PGN, send us a note if you get this line in a game. I mean, that's true for any of these lines. Like when people
Yeah.
get the lines that go all the way to, 10, 12, 13 moves, we love when they post in our Discord server showing off their wins in the lines. It's really fun. And then sometimes it gets turned into a YouTube video as well.
Yeah. One thing that I had trouble with in this line when I was training it is I always wanted to take with the C knight,
Hmm.
but it's important to remember that we need this B4 move at the end. And if we take with this knight, that's not defended anymore. So we need to take with the F knight instead.
I was also wondering if you take with the C knight first, is there a knight takes F3 with check after the pin?
Oh, if we take here,
Hmm.
I don't know.
So now if bishop E3, I was thinking they can get away now with the check. Whereas in the other
Yeah.
line, knight takes C2 wasn't with check.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, so that's the last line of chapter 7, the French defense. And in the next chapter, we're going to look at a much better defense for black, the Caro Kann, which we have a full course on. And we're going to show how to beat the Caro Kann. And we'll be gentle in the line that we recommend for black. So see you in the next chapter.